Hi, I'm Simon Hope and welcome back to these threading jig videos. In the next two series we're going to make something a bit more complicated. This one we're going to make a threaded bolt, like so. It has a 16 TPI on the lid and it has a 12 TPI on the main part. And there's certain formulas to sort of get the proportions right, and those will pop up at the end, those different proportions, but we'll use them during the process on how we make these. I'm going to use a bit of hornbeam and a bit of elm for the top. So let's get started. So this piece already mounted in the lathe, this will be for the top, and this long piece will be for this part here. The first job is to make the thread on the inside here. When we thread that piece on, we can then turn it around to make this thread, and then we'll continue and show you how to mark out and sand the hex for the top. So the first job we need to do is just true that face up and just true the piece of wood. We have some flats on here. So I'll just use my ball gouge, just very, very carefully. Yep, that's running true. So we're going to do some basic formulas to get the proportions right, and the first thing I need to do is just establish what that diameter is. So I'm just going to zero my verniers up, and that is 59.52, but we'll just call it 59.5. We need to work out the diameter of the actual main shaft of the bolt. So to do that, the measurement that we need is the diameter of this part, and we times that by, divide that by 1.7. So to establish the first measurement, what we need to do is to take this diameter and to work out the diameter of the next part, we're going to divide the diameter by 1.7. So 59.5 divided by 1.7 is 35 mil. So that's what the main shaft diameter is. And we're going to just transfer that size onto here.
Yeah, so you do this just to bring it in the right proportion that it looks fine?
Yeah, sure. For that reason, because if it's too big and bulky, it just doesn't look right. So I've just worked out these proportions. So whatever size you make it just looks correct. So 35 millimeter. We'll just mark that on here. And we'll start to do the inside of the lid now. So I'll just go back to the spindle gouge, but we've got to come short. So I normally stop short by about 2 millimeter or so. We'll use the detail tool. And I use the round bar because it cuts nice and parallel. I look down at the bed bars just to make sure that that is parallel. Put a chamfer on that edge. We're now ready just to zap that with some super glue before actually cutting the thread. Just activate that off. Just going to move this stop out the way. We have a gap here, We make sure we have a gap on this part. That just needs tightening up. We then line up on this front edge here and just look with the bed bars just to make sure we get that parallel. And I might just use a steel rule just to help me do that. Just wants to come back a little bit. Excellent. So very important, make sure everything's locked off and tight so those parts don't move. And then we just bring this out the way and get the cutter started. Remember, this is going to go about 3,000 RPM, so it cuts nice and clean. And gently take that in. Now, it shouldn't be cutting. We need to bring it so it's just starting to touch the wood. There, so I can just about hear it. So that's the 0 position. So it's 5 clicks in total, so we're going to do 4. Now we can use our depth stop here as we've reached the bottom, and when we do the next cut we don't have to worry about that, it will stop at the correct position. Carefully take that out and then we can stop and just use the hinge base just to have a look and add a little bit more super glue into the threads. So nice and gently just drop some thin into the threads, and that's just going to strengthen everything up, ready to do just the finishing cut. Just give that a very quick activate. Bit of tissue just to wipe that away. So we've got one more click just to do a finishing cut. So that's the first stage done. Now we're going to take this out and then remount it again. So what I like to do is just mark here where the number 1 is, so it goes back into the same position. We have our next piece of wood. This is hornbeam. It's quite a hard wood, quite nice for threading actually. I chose it because it's quite a nice light colour against the elm, but it's also good for threading. Just going to clean the face up first. There's some more measurements we have to sort of work out. So remember, we worked out that the outside was 35mm. Yeah, so we can just roughly mark that on the outside. And we can actually take that down to that diameter. You can use a spindle roughing gouge, but I'm just going to use this swept back bowl gouge. So we're getting close to the size now. And I like to just use the skew. I'm going to use the round nose skew on the back of the parting tool. And that just helps to get it nice and parallel. Just a little bit more off there. Perfect. So we need to work out the offset. So we use our verniers and we just wobble that across the diameter on the inside and just press 0. And then the offset is 1.1 millimeter. So let's just make sure that is correct. 0, 1.1 millimeter. 1.09, that's close enough. So just quickly swap that back round to the parting tool. And remember to put the thin cut at the back, like so. I'll just double check the size. That's it. And we'll stop, super glue and put our thread on there. Some woods are sort of hard enough that you don't have to use the super glue, but I mean it takes seconds to do and it hardens everything up, so I just do it most woods now just to make sure everything's nice and strong. Just take the depth stop back out the way. So remember, we need our gap here and we need our gap here. And we'll just set that up at the front like so. Look at the bed bars to make sure we're parallel. A little bit more. Just bring everything out the way and we'll start that up. So it's 4 clicks. That looks pretty good actually. We'll just stop and check that so we can hinge out the way and just test our thread. Now it should still be just a little bit on the tight side because we've got one more click to go in theory. So we'll just super glue that just to add some strength in the bottom of the threads. Just activate that off. Just wipe that through. So one more click. Perfect. Now that might sound a little bit squeaky, but wood grinds against wood, so I normally like to just use a little bit of wax. This is just beeswax and liquid paraffin melted together, but you can use ordinary sort of finishing wax. You just want, or beeswax, anything on there just to stop the woods grinding together. And once you've done that, everything runs really nice and free. So that's perfect. And I always try and aim for that to run free. If that's really tight, yeah, it's no good. It has to run free, like so. So there's a little bit more work to do on this part before we turn it around and start cutting the threads. Let's just drop that back down and get the tool rest back. So the next measurement that we need is how long that is in proportion to the size of that. Of course, you can buy different length bolts, but I've just worked out this formula that makes everything look pretty good. So the next one is the diameter of that part, and you times it by 1.7. So let me just... Yeah, 59, 100, 100.3, but 100 is about right. So right down to there, that's pretty good. Work that out just about right. But what we want to do now is to make this a box, is just to take the inside of that out. Now, normally I perhaps use a Forstner bit, 20 mil or whatever size was needed, but I'll just do what I can with the spindle gouge and maybe the carbide, just to take the inside out, just to show you the process of and the finished look of what it would look like. I was very limited on the weight in my baggage, so I couldn't bring my full box of Forstner bits with me, so I'm just going to use a spindle gouge and a carbide just to hollow some of this out. Now, if you're using the spindle gouge as a drill, a little technique is to lift up slightly towards the centre. You tip over at sort of 45 degrees, and as you start cutting, the rest just needs to go up just a little bit more. It will actually start to sort of drill by itself, and then you can actually come off of the rest slightly and push to drill out the centre. It does keep getting clogged up, so you have to keep moving the waste out, but quite quickly you can actually use that as a drill to actually go down to the full depth. You'll see that I just sort of move it slightly to help it find the centre and drill down. It will get very hot as well, so be careful not to touch the tip, but just make sure you keep clearing the shavings out. So we don't want to go too far, we want to go down to about there. So we're actually nearly there. Yeah, and very quickly we've gone down to depth. Now that would vibrate too much if I try to sort of take anything out there, so I like to go over to the carbide tool, and I'm going to use the little 6mm one, and that should do the job just fine. Always mount the cutter sort of in line with the grub screw, so when you are actually reaching inside, you can see exactly where position of the cutter is. For instance, if you want a safer cut, you can see by the grub screws that you're tilting over at 45 and the cutter is in relation to the handle. Now these cutters actually prefer a higher speed, so I'm actually going to get the speed going higher. So we're actually going sort of 2,500, and you're letting the wood or the speed do the work, and you're not having to put as much force or effort in the tool. So I can feel that straight away, how much easier that is. As we're starting to reach down, I'll just move the rest in. You will get a little bit of vibration the deeper you go, but just ease up on the pressure of cut. The biggest problem is the shavings keep clogging up. I think we've just about reached the bottom, so I'm just going to make that a little bit bigger, slightly tapered at the top. Yeah, the shavings are just in the way there, so let's clear those, do a finishing cut, and the inside of that's done. Now I do normally actually sand that and get a sort of reasonable finish in there. So I am going to go in and actually sand that. I'll just show you very quickly how I approach sanding in there. You certainly don't want to put your fingers down there because you could have some damage. So very, very simply, I just have a dowel. You can buy this Velcro sticky backed, and I just wind that on like so. And I normally use this paste wax actually for sanding because the dust sort of builds in the with the polish and actually penetrates into the grain and actually helps to fill the grain. So I do use some of that. I'll just get a little bit on the inside. We don't want to overload it, but we want enough just to help it get into the grain. It also helps to keep the heat down. So you want a lower speed, you don't want to go too fast, but just very quickly show you how I'd approach sanding in there. Yeah, you can see all the dust and the polish mixed together. I'm only just going to do this grade, but normally I'd go through the grits and really get that sanded nicely on the inside. But yeah, just for demonstration purposes, we'll stop there. So the next stage is to put that top on, like so. And we need to work out how wide that is. And there's another little formula for that. Pencil. And that is the diameter of that, and you times that by 0.4. So that was 59 times 0.4, 23.6. We'll just call it 24. Okay. Very, very crudely done, I know, but it just gives me rough proportions of what I need. So we're just going to swap back over to the spindle gouge. And we can use that now as a drive to finish the top of this off. Obviously we're leaning away from the chuck there, so you can't take too heavy bites. A little bit of speed and nice and gently. just to make sure that's parallel. And now we need to work out our sort of divisions to make that into a hexagon. So what you can do is you can use your index system, and that's every 4 clicks on a typical 24 index, or you could just measure the diameter to give you the radius, so 59.5. So we want to be about 29.75, but yeah. So we'll mark that 29.75, which is roughly where we need to be. I'm not going to be, yeah, close enough. And very, very simply, we can just mark those positions out like so. Almost there. And we can take that round, and you can see we've gone back to the same position. So I'll just use my ruler just to mark these. So the more time you spend and more accurate you are, the better it's going to look, because if one side's longer than the other, you know, it can sort of stand out. So just a little bit of time just marking this out. Nearly there. Okay. So that comes off. I'm actually going to part this part off now, and then we're going to make another thread to turn it around, because we need to cut the threads on this part, and we'll show you that after we've actually used the sanding disc to get that shaped. So we keep this bit of wood. We're going to make a thread in that a bit later on. We'll just get the top sanded up first. So this is the aluminium sanding disc from Woodturning, and I'm going to use my sanding table. Now we're going to get the extraction going, so I'm going to not speak, we're just going to just get it sanded up. So very quickly and easy, we have our hexagon. We'll take this apart and get on to the next process. Okay, so the next stage is to make a thread in here to accept this, so that we can get the thread cut in this part. But it's very easy to make threads. We have the threading jig, right? So it's just a question of time just to make another thread. This is the correct size. We'll just stop and make sure that size is correct. Yeah, okay. Now I'm not going to worry about the super glue on this one, because If it chips out a little bit, I'm not really worried. It's a scrap piece of wood, just enable us to finish the project. So 4 clicks. Just check that. It's quite tight, but I'm going to accept that because it's all going to run true and we can use it to cut our threads. So that's pretty good. I just want to clean the bottom up before I remount the threading jig. So I like to put a nice chamfer on here. Very, very carefully just clean up the bottom part. And if there's just a very tiny sort of run out there, I'd normally just get that sanded at this stage, just to take out any run out. So just very quickly do that. So these are numbered down 1 to 6, 1 being 120. And that's sanded down to 600 grit. So we're going to take this out and we're going to talk about the extra long cutter that's available. But we're going to make our first cut with the ordinary one to begin with. But to enhance the look and to do the longer threads, we'll use the extra long threading jig cutter. What I can also show you in this at this time is how to change the spindle. So we've got 16 TPI mounted at the moment, and we're going to swap that out for a 12 TPI and make a much coarser thread. So it's very, very easy to do. We just take the parts off, release this Allen key here, and then the spindle just pops out, okay? So this is the 10 TPI we're going to use. Slightly coarser, so it's going to give more of a better look to the thing. All the spindles from the sort of previous Mark 1 model still fit into the Mark 2 model, so if you have a Mark 1, you can still buy extra spindles and it will still fit onto your threading jig. So we're just going to snap that shut. Still need a little gap here and here. We're just going to line that up like so and make sure that that is parallel. So this is quite important now because we've got a long parallel part that we're threading, so you really do have to make sure that this is parallel. So just use your steel ruler and really sort of eye it down, and yeah, let's bang on. So we now have 10 TPI. So for 10 TPI, which is here, this one here, we need 9 clicks. That's how deep we need to go. So I normally start with maybe 7, look at the finish, and maybe then do the next 2 clicks to go to full depth. So we need to do the kiss test and get it just touching, which it just is there. Seven. So nice and gently. This will take a little bit of time. But we'll just feed that through, supporting with the left hand as we're making the cut. And we'll take that as far as we can. Very, very gently just take that out. I do put a little bit of back pressure on with my finger, just so it doesn't catch on the way out. And then we do 2 more clicks. 1, 2. So we haven't gone very far there, we'd like that to go further. So here's the extra long cutter, made just to make projects like this. This can be purchased as an accessory. We're just going to swap it out onto with the cutter holder, with the previous cutter. This is the standard one. There's a little flat on there, so you just need to take it beyond there. And it has a line on there, so you know where to locate that to. Okay, so there's a little trick we can do to actually line the cutter back up again, and I'd like to show you that. So we take that back, and we take that back into the start position, where we have a little gap and a little gap here. And all we do is just line that up as best we can to begin with in that gap. Very important to get it parallel, so that's the next stage. And what I do is sort of pivot on where it's sort of stuck into the groove there, pivot on that position until we get it parallel. It's not quite. Just pivot that round just a little bit more. Yeah. Double check. Parallel. So you might be wondering how we can get that exactly lined up. Well, it's actually quite easy. I mean, first of all, because we've pivoted on that point, it's pretty good anyway, as it is. Maybe just needs to go over a tad. But what you can do is release this, and you get about 15 mil of movement each way. So if we take that cutter out of the way, you can see we can tap that forward, or we can tap that back. So you can actually very, very accurately get that lined up exactly into the bottom of the thread. Yep, so we've tapped it out forward just a little bit. Yeah, spot on. So you can see we can fire that up. So I still take it back, and I still sort of get the 0 position. So it's just touching there, so that's 0. And I still do the 2 passes. So we're going to do 7. That's as far as we can go. Now we're just going to take that down until we just start cutting the same as before, so we match up the same thread there. So that's a double cut with the extra long cutter. This was tight, remember, because we left it so it run true. So that's the end of the project. Quite a long project, an hour of making. but hopefully it's just given you some ideas on how to expand and make more complicated things using the threading jig. So I hope I haven't bored you, and you come back and see some more videos. Thanks for watching.
Yeah.